tutorial, we're going to use After Effects to create a convincing UFO flyby video that's designed to look like handheld footage shot with a cell phone. Once we've launched Adobe After Effects, we'll see the Start screen. And while it does a lot of important stuff, we're going to start from scratch with a blank project, which is After Effects default, so we can just close it. First things first, we need to add some footage to our blank project. File Import works, of course. But there are lots of ways to do things in After Effects, and a quicker way is to simply double-click on the project panel to open up the Import dialog box. Or, if you have your footage window open in your Finder or Explorer, like I have here, we can also simply drag elements from their folder into the project panel. Whichever way you choose, make sure to import Background 4K, Corn Moon, Lamp Post, UFO, and UFO audio. Clicking on each element reveals important information at the top of the project panel. Background is a 4K video clip shot at 24 frames per second. Corn Moon is 1280 by 720 at 2997 frames per second. Lamp Post is an Adobe Photoshop file with transparency. And UFO is a simple 3D model created in Cinema 4D and exported as a QuickTime animation file with transparency. One way to tell if an element has transparency is if the description includes millions of colors plus. The plus usually indicates an alpha channel, which is used for transparency. We can also double-click any element to open it in the clip viewer, where we can play back the clip with the spacebar and click on the checkerboard at the bottom here to confirm that this element is in fact on a transparent background. And the last clip is our audio file. In After Effects, we do our design work using compositions. Making one is as easy as selecting a menu item, using its associated shortcut, which you can see in the menu, or in our case, we're going to create a new composition by selecting our background 4K element and dragging it onto our comp icon at the bottom of the project window, the one that looks like a little film frame. You'll notice that quite a few things have changed on screen. A new item has shown up in the project panel, named the same as our background layer. Click it and see that the new comp has inherited the size and the frame rate of the clip we just dragged on the comp icon, which is perfect for our project. If we want to rename the comp so it's more distinctive in the project panel, we can select it, press Enter on the keyboard, and edit it. In my case, I'll get rid of the 4K at the end. In addition, we now have a comp window here, which is where we can see the results of our work, and a timeline, where we control animation, navigate time, and stacking order, among other things. Like most other Adobe apps, there are a lot of panels available to us, some of them visible by default, and others accessible through the Window menu. One panel that we'll use again and again is the Preview panel, which contains playback controls so we can check our work in full motion. You can also initiate playback by tapping the spacebar, as long as the comp window or the timeline window is active when you do. Panels can be docked together in tabbed groups. For this project, the important panels to have open are the ones I've mentioned so far, as well as the Effects and Presets panel and the Info panel. These should all be open by default, unless you've loaded another workspace or otherwise modified things. If they aren't visible, you can just reload the standard workspace, or if you don't want to do that, you can choose them individually from the Window menu. Make sure they're all open and available, and you're ready to start working on our UFO project. Imported assets, you're ready to start working. You can also open the Part 2 project file and just start from there. The special effects shot that we're trying to accomplish is relatively simple. I shot a wide-angle lockdown shot of Manhattan from Eagle Rock, New Jersey, which offers a spectacular panoramic view of New York City. We're going to composite some convincing full moon footage into the scene to give us an excuse to zoom into our large background. After a few seconds, a UFO will fly through the scene and will animate our view to simulate a camera following the move. And to finish it all up, we'll add some effects to make everything appear as if it's really in the same scene together. We'll wiggle our camera to create a more convincing handheld camera effect, and we'll add some audio to help sell the story. The first step is to combine our elements in the big background comp, starting with the background movie and our moon movie. Make sure the time marker is on the first frame of the comp. In the first segment, we notice that the moon clip is a different size and running at a different frame rate from our background layer. We don't care at all because After Effects is happy to combine elements of different sizes and frame rates in the same comp. You'll see that the moon comes in at its smaller native resolution, which is fine. I'm going to scale it down a little more, in fact, by just dragging a corner point while pressing the Shift key to constrain proportions. If I watch the info panel as I drag, I can get feedback about the scale, and I'll stop when I'm just a little above 50%. Next, I'll drag the moon to this area slightly left of the center of the comp. I'll also zoom in slightly, using the roll wheel on my mouse, or if I don't have a mouse, I can use Command plus and minus on a Mac or Control plus and minus on Windows, or I can use the zoom pop-up at the bottom of the comp window. And even though the space bar is used to start and stop playback, it can also be held down to quickly access the pan tool, which allows us to drag with the mouse to reposition the screen, which we'll do now to arrange the screen like we see here. Down in the timeline, you'll notice that we now have two layers, the background and the moon. If you're familiar with Adobe Photoshop, a lot of what you see here may look familiar. You can turn visibility on and off by toggling the eyeballs, change stacking order just by dragging. If you play around with this, make sure the moon ends up back on top. And if you click on the Toggle Switches/Modes button at the bottom, you can even reveal all of the familiar blend modes from Photoshop, which allow you to mix pixels together. Unlike Photoshop, however, everything you do in After Effects is non-destructive by default, so you can always play around without fear of messing things up permanently. There are lots of switches and buttons in the timeline too. Notice these triangles to the left of the layer name. Click on the triangle for the moon layer and you'll see some really important stuff. Click next to Transform and reveal the geometric properties for the layer. This is where you can fine-tune how a layer looks and even animate these properties. If we make sure our modes are visible by using the toggle button, choose one of the light modes, which occupy this second section. I settled on Classic Color Dodge, which I like because it picks up some of the underlying grain, which will help sell the final composite. This is obviously blown out and the layer creates a noticeable sharp edge, but fortunately both of these things are easy to fix. Let's start with the sharp edge. Making sure the moon layer is selected, choose the rectangular mask tool and drag out a rectangle that's as wide as the layer but not quite as tall. It should visibly clip off the bottom of the moon, like so. Once you've done this, notice that a new property has shown up in the moon layer called Mask 1. Twirl this open, find Mask Feather, click and drag this value up to about 180. This solves our hard edge problem, but may seem like overkill. Fortunately, it also makes it seem like the moon is emerging from a soft cloud, which I like. Drag the time marker and see how it moves. Next, let's take down the opacity of the moon. It doesn't need to be nearly this bright. I'll drag the opacity down to just over 50%. It's looking better, but there's still some light spill and color bleeding that looks artificial. Some basic color correction effects will fix that. Applying effects in After Effects is easy. The Effect menu lets you easily rummage through hierarchical menus to see the hundreds of effects and filters available to you. Once you get to know what's in there, you'll probably prefer the Effects and Presets panel because of its nifty search feature. If you click in Search and type Levels, for example, you can quickly locate the Levels filter and apply it by dragging it from here onto the layer, either in the timeline or the comp window. This automatically opens up the Effect Control panel over here, where we can interact with the Levels filter just like in Photoshop. In this case, we're going to drag this top left triangle to the right, which will clip the darker pixels to black and get rid of the extra haze. There's still a little unwanted blue color overwhelming the effect, so let's go back to the Effect and Presets panel and type Hue to bring up the hue saturation effect. Since the moon layer is still selected, we can apply it by simply double-clicking it and then drag the saturation slider down to get rid of the blue. This is looking pretty good. While we're still zoomed in, let's preview our moon effect by tapping the spacebar. Once the moon gets going at full speed, we can see that it's already starting to look pretty nice. New moon, it's time to add the UFO to the scene. You can also open up the Part 3 project file and just start from there. This UFO was created and animated in Cinema 4D, a version of which comes bundled with After Effects. I went ahead and pre-animated a basic flight through the scene from up left and close to down right and far away, with the resulting perspective shift. But even as I animated it in Cinema 4D, I knew I would be tweaking the results by further animating the layer within After Effects. You'll notice, if you look in the timeline, that the UFO clip is shorter, at 10 seconds, than the background clip, which is 15 seconds long. This is fine, since I don't want the UFO to appear until the 5-second mark anyway, and then play out to the end. If you click on the layer bar and hold the Shift key down as you drag the clip to the right, it'll snap to the end of the comp. After Effects has a few different ways to animate things, but the most common way is with keyframes. Let's say I want the first frame of the UFO movie to start off-screen left, and at the end I want it to end up just to the right of the Chrysler Building. Well, on the first frame of the UFO clip, which we can snap to by moving the time indicator with the Shift key down, we'll drag the element in the comp window until the UFO disappears off stage left. Now we twirl open the transform properties and click on the stopwatch next to the position property. This enables animation for the position property as well as setting a keyframe, which you can see here. Now we move to the last frame and drag the UFO clip over until the ship is to the right of the Chrysler Building. The position values for the layer have now changed, and this automatically sets another position keyframe. After Effects will smoothly interpolate between these two keyframes to create the animation. By the way, there's no need to click the stopwatch again. In fact, if you did, you would turn off animation for the layer, so you don't want to do that here. Now, the positional values that you see in the timeline, and represented visually as this Bezier path in the comp window, are relative to the center of the UFO layer by default, so don't let it confuse you that they don't appear to be attached to the UFO itself. I'll zoom out with my mouse wheel and show you that since I pre-rendered the UFO movie in Cinema 4D for you, After Effects sees the whole movie as one big rectangular object, even though most of it is transparent. And After Effects always sets the anchor point of a layer in the center by default. Well, if you scrub to the middle of the timeline, you can see that the UFO is close to passing in front of the moon. So if you just drag the layer down, you can see that a new keyframe is created, and Bezier handles have appeared that'll let you further tweak the shape of the path if you like. Almost everything in After Effects can be animated with keyframes, including effects. If you zoom out to see where you are so far, you'll see that the ship's motion is great now, but its color is not convincing for the scene. That's because in the real world, when an object is far away, the colors become low contrast and muted by haze in the atmosphere. Look at the background video and note that the darkest shadows in the city are really medium gray, and the shadows in the trees, in the nearer foreground, are much darker. To make this look more convincing, we need to correct the color of the UFO so that the shadows look better and animate the shadow color as the ship appears into the distance. A super simple tool for doing this is the Tint filter. Tint maps the lightest and the darkest portions of an image to colors of your choosing. If you go to where the UFO first appears and apply Tint, Notice that the image goes black and white, and in the Effects Control panel you'll see that the default colors are, in fact, black and white. But if you click the eyedropper for the black value and choose something from the shadows down left in our image, and then with the highlights, click the chip and choose a pale color such as yellow, you'll see that the ship now looks more like it belongs in the scene. You can further tweak the effect with the Amount to Tint slider, which fades the color effect. Click on the stopwatches for both color chips to enable animation. Then move closer to the end of the timeline. Use the eyedroppers to sample elements from the distance this time. And now see how the ship appears to fit into the background much more convincingly. Remember that keyframes will be set for you automatically once you click the stopwatches. Scrub a bit to confirm that the colors are changing, and we're almost done with this segment. To add a little depth, let's add a foreground element for the ship to pass behind. In this case, I have a light post photo that I separated from its background in Photoshop. Drag that into the scene, making sure the layer starts at frame 0, and then drag it into position on the left side of the comp in front of the other elements in the scene. Now we need to blur it a bit to give it the proper depth of field. Note that the closer elements, such as these trees, are blurrier than the distant objects, so the light pole will need to be even blurrier to look real. In the Effects and Presets panel, search for Camera Lens Blur, which will produce our most realistic results, and apply it to our lamppost. A blur radius value of about 20 looks good, and a quick adjustment with the Rotate tool will make the post look straight relative to the scene. Let's preview our work so far. This is a 4K comp, so depending on your computer, you may or may not have room to cache all of these frames in RAM. If you encounter any issues, you can always reduce the resolution of the comp preview using the pop-up in the comp window here. The lower the resolution, the more frames you can fit into. Now that you've incorporated the UFO into the scene, you're ready to create the fake handheld camera effect and apply some final color correction passes. You can also open the Part 4 project file and just start from there. Even though all of our work so far has taken place inside a great big 4K comp, our plan all along has been to crop into that larger comp to simulate a lower res handheld camera moving around to follow the action we've choreographed. To do that, we'll take advantage of one of After Effects' most powerful features, called nested compositions. Create a new comp by clicking on the Comp button. Call it Camera Move or Render Me or whatever. Ignore the presets and type in 1280 by 720 and 24 frames per second. Now, depending on your settings, you may have to switch off the aspect ratio lock to dial in these settings exactly. And lastly, make sure it's 15 seconds long and click OK. We now have an empty comp, so let's drag our background into it, which we can do in the list view here in the project panel. Boom! We now have a 720p window looking into our 4K comp. Now you just need to animate your background to simulate a camera looking around. You may be tempted to use position keyframes for this, and if you were just panning around, that would work out fine. But we also want to zoom in and out a little. And this is getting a little bit advanced, but I ask you to trust me on this. If you're going to both move and zoom into a larger layer in a smaller comp, the best way to do that is to animate the anchor point of a layer, not the position. The anchor point is, by default, the center of the layer. And because we added the background to the comp by dragging items in the project panel, the anchor point should now be centered conveniently in the comp window here. If you twirl open the transform properties for the layer, you can see that the position values are exactly centered on the dimensions of the comp, while the anchor point is centered on the dimensions of the much larger layer. Zoom way out, and hopefully this will make sense. If you now scrub the anchor point values in the timeline, especially while we're zoomed out, you'll see that you can change the view of the pixels appearing on screen even though the position of the layer hasn't technically changed, because you're changing the attach point for the layer. Adjust these values until you can see the full moon centered on the screen. And this is why we use anchor point. I now want to zoom in on the moon using scale. If we had changed the position of the layer instead of the anchor, zooming would be tricky because zoom is centered on the anchor point. Since we kept the anchor point centered in our comp, we can freely zoom in and the screen will magnify around the center of our view, just like a real camera. Okay, so now you can get a little freeform. I'll do some steps here and you should generally follow along, but don't worry if you aren't entering exactly the same values at exactly the same times. I'll frame the scene on the full moon to start, move to about 2 seconds, and enable animation for scale and for anchor. I'll drag ahead about a second, and I'll set my scale value back to 100, and adjust the framing so it includes both the moon and the Chrysler Building. Scrub to almost 5 seconds, and set keyframes with the same values. Do this by clicking on the keyframe icon, not on the stopwatch, which will turn off animation altogether. Don't want that. These 2 sets of keyframes freeze the action for these few seconds. Now move ahead a half second or so, and adjust the anchor point so the camera is now pointed almost but not quite all the way up left, where the UFO is coming into view. This next bit is not supposed to be a smooth track. It's supposed to feel handheld. So drag ahead a couple seconds and adjust the anchor. Drag again and adjust, and so on to the end of the comp. You can totally improvise this. And at the end, I'll animate another zoom effect, accidentally zooming out before zooming in to follow the ship more closely. Okay, for a rough move, this looks pretty good. But an automated wiggle will help it look even better. In the Effects and Presets panel, search for Wiggle-Position. There it is, and drag it onto our background. Now, as you can see in the effect controls, the scene is wiggling the position by default up to 50 pixels in any direction, once per second. 50 is good when the camera is following the UFO, but it's probably too much for the start of the scene. So working backwards, we'll animate that value down to 10 during the first wild move. Lens blur, and some global color correction and grain in order to really make this effect convincing. You can also open the Part 5 project file and just start from there. Let's start with motion blur. Don't be confused by the blur category in the list of effects. That won't do what we need here. We want geometric motion blur, which After Effects can calculate based on the motion of the elements in a comp. To turn it on, you use 2 switches, and you need to make sure your timeline is showing switches by clicking the toggle button down here. First, there's the motion blur switch for the layer. Second, there's the master motion blur switch, which needs to be turned on for the comp right here. Now that both switches are on, if you drag the time indicator around, you can see that blur is being added as the background layer whips around the scene. Next, we want to add a few more effects to really sell the scene, and for that we'll use an adjustment layer. As in Photoshop or Premiere Pro, an adjustment layer is basically an invisible control layer that lets you apply effects to it, and those effects will apply to everything that's visible below the adjustment layer in stacking order. And the adjustment layer will be especially useful in this comp since we only want to calculate effects on this smaller 1280 by 720 window. Whereas if we applied an effect directly to the 4K background layer, it would be much slower to calculate since that background layer is so large. So the adjustment layer is more convenient, and in this case will save us a lot of render time as well. The first new effect to add will be our friend the camera lens blur effect. I'll initially set the blur to 0. But during the first pan to the UFO, I want to quickly animate a blur effect to help simulate the autofocus of a camera. Notice there's a stopwatch in the effect panel to turn on animation, just like in the timeline. So I'll animate from 0 up to 40 and back down initially. And then at the end of the timeline, I'll go from 0 up to 15 and back to 0. Now here's a cool tip. Once you've set keyframes for a property, tapping the U key will reveal just the animated properties in a layer. Now you can fine-tune. For example, I'll select just this one keyframe, copy it, and paste it a few frames later to hold the camera out of focus for a few extra frames. Another cool thing about the camera lens blur effect is that it allows you to amplify the highlights of a scene, which is a useful trick for unifying the brights of different composited elements. A value of 10 will help the moon look a little more luminous, as well as pumping up the city lights. You'll have to bring down the threshold a little bit in this scene to reveal it. In fact, during our final zoom, we can animate the gain up to, say, 50 to simulate the camera re-exposing itself after a zoom. Applying a uniform color wash to the whole scene will further help the different elements to look like they belong together. Let's add a photo filter, set to a cooling preset, with a density of about 20% to help with that. Now let's add a subtle layer of additional noise. Maybe 10%, just to add a tiny bit of chatter that'll help stitch everything together. And finally, add the audio file that I've provided to help sell that this is a real event being witnessed by off-camera civilians. After you save the project, you'll be ready to export a finished movie. Finessed the look of the scene, you're ready to export the project so you can share it with the world. You can also open the Part 6 project file and just start from there. You could render this composition straight out of After Effects using the render queue, but for final export, I recommend using Adobe Media Encoder. Select the comp in the project window, go up to the Composition menu, and choose Add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. This will launch Media Encoder if it's not already running, and will add the comp to the list of items to be rendered. Most likely, that list will contain just this one comp. If you already have Media Encoder running, you can also drag comps directly from After Effects into the Render Queue window. In this window, you can choose from a wide variety of options for output. For web delivery, I usually choose H.264 as a format, Match Source High Bitrate as a preset, which keeps the resolution and frame rate and renders it at very good quality. There are lots and lots of presets in the column on the right, and you can create your own or modify them to suit your needs. But once you use one, it should show up as a default the next time you render something. So once I get a routine down, the most likely thing I'll change is the output file name or path, which I get to by clicking here. Simply click the green arrow to start encoding, and because you're using Media Encoder, you're now free to go back to After Effects and continue working, which is awesome. By contrast, if you render straight out of After Effects, you can't continue to use After Effects until that rendering is complete. Once the render is finished, you can quickly navigate to the final render by just clicking on the name link in the queue.
Nice. Whoa, what is... Look up, up left, up left, up left. What? Zoom in. What is that? Is that a drone?